I thought that what we would do is I want to take just a moment to probably read this section through one time because it's been a little while since we kind of took a look at it. So what I'll do is I'll just run through this reading really quick. But what I want to do first is just start off with, I've been trying to, you notice the last couple of weeks, is pick out something in the text which I think speaks to a greater idea or something that is present in the text. And so this week I kind of noticed something important. I think it's pretty important, and that is the struggle of prayer, especially with Jacob's prayer being in this section. We'll take a look at that in a moment when we get to that section. But I wanted to just run through a couple of really quick ideas regarding prayer, which I think will elucidate some in just a moment. So Psalm 45:18 says, "The Lord is near all who cry out to him, all who cry out to him in truth. He satisfies the desire of his loyal followers. He hears their cry for help and delivers them." What do you notice about some key elements of this passage? There he is. What's up, buddy?
The Lord's near, for one thing.
Yeah.
All cry out.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think that there's two key elements to this section, to that little passage right there, which kind of the whole thing hinges on. Do you see what those two elements might be? If you were to look at that passage and say, okay, there's a couple of caveats there. There's some great promises. The Lord is near to all who cry out to him, and he satisfies your desires and hears your cry for help. But on what basis, Angela?
You cry out to him in truth and a loyal follower.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Those who call out to him in truth and those who are his loyal followers. I mean, we know from looking at it in the book of 1 Peter where it talks about what can hinder your prayers, Mikey.
Did you make this one up? Because my 45 one goes to 17.
You know what? I may have. Did you find the text in there?
No, I'm not sure where this one is.
Really? Maybe I put Psalm instead of Proverbs. That is entirely possible. I totally might have janked that. Is that in Proverbs instead of Psalms? Yes, ma'am.
I have one that goes with this.
Let's hear it.
Psalm 119, 150, and 151.
How so?
They draw near that follow after mischief. They are far from your Torah. You are near, O Yahweh, and all your commandments are truth. And earlier in that same psalm, it says your Torah is truth and all your words are truth.
Yep, absolutely.
The whole near thing.
Yep. Very nice, very nice. So, you know what? I apologize. I must have kind of messed that up and got the wrong one, but I'm going to take just a second and find it for you.
Sounds good anyway.
145.
145. I apologize. Thank you, Tracy. Psalm 145:18. Yes. So, key point being there, those who cry out to him in truth, and he satisfies the desires of his loyal followers. And you know that your prayers are dependent upon certain things. I'm reminded of the book of 1 Peter, where it says something can hinder your prayers. Does anybody remember what that is? Relationships between husbands and wives. If you are not showing, if your relationship with your wife is out of sync, it says your prayers, it can hinder your prayers. That's a fascinating little section that you might take a look at. But I think what this really talks to me about is there's really a lot of stuff about prayer that can be rather confusing, frankly. Prayer for most Christians, for most people who engage in prayer, it's more like begging. It's more like begging for God, begging God for help. And believe me, when you're in trouble and you need some help, there's nothing better than calling out to God for help. But I think, unfortunately, often the people who call out to God, their prayers oftentimes are most clearly demonstrating a lack of faith. Because oftentimes when we call out to God, in a lot of cases and I don't mean our prayers aren't answered because we lack faith, like you might have heard from some sources out there. It's like, well, you just didn't believe enough, so your prayers weren't answered. I think that's a terrible thing to say to someone. If you go to your pastor or something and you're like, I've been praying for this and that, and you come back to him like 9 months later, it's like, yeah, I'm still praying for that. God is not answering my prayers. Oh, well, you just don't have enough faith, your faith is not strong enough. If you had faith that was strong enough, then God would answer your prayers. That is a truly horrible, horrible thing to say, I think. That's just my opinion. Angela?
I think a lot of times, for me anyway, it's trying to convince God that he should do it the way I think he should, instead of me accepting it the way he does it.
That is the biggest challenge.
Instead of me aligning myself with his will, it's me trying to manipulate him into doing it.
Yeah. And that is really the biggest challenge for, I think, most people in understanding prayer, is that we need to come to a realization that if our attitude is such that our hearts and our wills are not aligned with God's, then what we're really saying to God is, I want you to align yourself to my will. And that is a recipe for shipwrecked faith, frankly. He won't do it anyway, and you won't get your prayers answered, and you'll be frustrated, and you'll think God doesn't answer prayer. Do you guys know if God answers prayer? God answers prayer. He does answer prayer. Sometimes he'll answer your prayers, even though he really shouldn't. And he'll give you what you want, even though it's not really what you need. That can be dangerous. But I think, unfortunately, what we're saying to God really is, I'm not terribly interested in your will. I'm actually interested in you doing my will. And that's just a recipe for disaster. And it'll wreck your faith, man, if you don't believe that God will answer your prayers. But, I don't know if you've ever done this, but you can see, if you go into your Bible and you go to do a Google search about prayer in the Bible. I'm only thinking of the one, but maybe you guys can think of others, where somebody is literally instructing someone else in how to pray. I mean, we all know that one, right? When the disciples say to Yeshua, teach us how to pray, and he gives them the Lord's Prayer, as you've heard it called, or whatever. And I don't know if you've been in any kind of a study about prayer and you've used that prayer as a model for prayer. That's a great model for prayer. But what I'm more referring to is like looking at examples of prayer in the Bible, what people actually prayed. Not necessarily when it says he prayed, then this is what happened, but the words that are recorded. I'm thinking of Daniel chapter 9. I'm thinking of Nehemiah and Ezra. I'm thinking of Second Chronicles 6, where Solomon is dedicating the temple. Yeah. So when you do a study in your Bible about what are the words that people who prayed in the Bible, if you look at the words that are recorded, what do those words show? What do they reflect? Do you know what now I want to clarify briefly that some people consider prayer in the Bible to be God appeared to Abraham and Abraham's having a conversation with God, and that's prayer. To me, that seems a little different than what I would consider prayer, because when I'm talking about it, I'm like, God is not standing in front of me or appeared to me. I'm talking to him and he's not apparently present. You know what I'm saying? But some people consider, if you're just talking to God because he appeared to you in a dream or something like Abraham, they consider that prayer. I was like, somehow that doesn't seem fair to equate that with my prayer, where Sometimes I can feel like I'm talking to the air. I'm just like you. I feel like I'm talking to the air a lot of times. So what are the words that they use, and how does that equate to, is that a model for us? So that's what I kind of wanted to touch on briefly before we launch into this section, because prayer is not asking God to do our will. It's okay to ask, but be prepared to submit your will to His, because if you're continuously asking God for what you want and you're not terribly concerned with what He wants, that's a recipe for failure. But if you begin to align yourself to what He wants, that's when Yeshua said, you can ask for anything you want, and I'll do it. When you're asking for God's will to be done, and you have a decent idea about what that might be, and you're praying for God's will, well, you're going to start seeing some prayers answered all the time. That's a faith builder. So we'll think about that in a moment when we get there. But prayer is us aligning ourselves with God, and thus prayer is always answered when you're aligning yourself with God. So we're going to address that in just a moment when we get to Jacob's prayer. Does anyone know what the first recorded prayer is in the Bible? That's a very instructive study right there in itself. We know the rule of first mention, or something that happens the first time, is always really interesting. Does anybody know what the first recorded prayer is in the Bible? Where somebody's speaking a prayer and the Bible records the words of their prayer?
Wasn't Adam. I mean, not him. Not Cain or.
No. It's Eliezer. Yep. When he went to get a wife for Abraham's son Isaac, and he was standing by the well, and he says, "Oh God, here I am. I've stationed myself here." That's the very first recorded prayer in the Bible, where it tells us what the words of the prayer was. And this prayer of Jacob in this section is the second prayer in the Bible. The two are remarkably similar. Very, very interesting. So, let me just take a moment, and unfortunately, my computer updated here, and now it's not fitting on the screen exactly right. So I'm going to read this passage to you. I'll read it in the same translation. I'm just not going to read it off of the screen because I got it offset there and I need to fix it. Sorry about that. So Genesis 32 is where we'll start. So it says that early in the morning, Lavan got up and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them, and then Lavan left and returned to his own place, and Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Yaakov saw them, he said, "This is God's camp," and called that place Mahanaim, meaning two camps. Now, Yaakov sent messengers ahead to him, to Esau his brother, toward the land of Seir, the country of Edom, with these instructions: "Here is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Yaakov," Jacob, "says, I have been living with Lavan and have stayed until now. I have cattle, donkeys, and flocks, and male and female servants. I am sending to tell this news to my lord, in order to win your favor." That's weird. My text doesn't say that. Does your text say "in order to win your favor" or something like that?
Find favor.
To find favor? Okay. For whatever reason, this translation I have in front of me does not say that. The messengers returned to Yaakov, saying, "We went to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. With him are 400 men." Yaakov became greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people, flocks, cattle, and camels with him into two camps, saying, "If Esau comes to attack one camp, comes to one camp and attacks it, at least the camp that is left will escape." So then Jacob said, "God of my father Abraham and God of my father Yitzhak, Yehovah, who told me, 'Return to your country and your kinsmen, and I will do you good.' I'm not worthy of all the love and faithfulness you have shown to your servant since I crossed the Jordan with only my staff. But now I have become two camps. Please rescue me from my brother Esau. I'm afraid of him, afraid he'll come and attack me without regard for mothers or children." You said, I will certainly do you good and make your descendants as numerous as the grains of sand by the sea, which there are so many that you can't count them. He stayed there that night. Then he chose from among his possessions the following as a present for Esau, his brother: 200 female goats and 20 males, 200 female sheep and 20 males, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 colts. He turned them over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, cross over in front of me and keep a space between each drove and the next one. He instructed the servants in front, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, whose servant are you, where are you going, and whose animals are these, then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob, and they are a present he has sent to my lord Esau. And Jacob himself is just behind us. He also instructed the second servant and the third and all that followed the droves, when you encounter Esau, you are to speak to him in the same way. And you are to add, and there, just behind us, is your servant Jacob. For he said, I will appease him first with the present that goes ahead of me. Then after that, I will see him myself. Maybe he will be friendly towards me. So the present crossed over ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. He got up that night, took his 2 wives, 2 slave girls, and his 11 children, and forded the Jabbok or Yabok river. He took them and sent them across the stream, then sent his possessions across, and Jacob was left alone. Then a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he did not defeat Yaakov, he struck Jacob's hip socket, so that his hip was dislocated while wrestling with him. The man said, let me go, because it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I won't let you go unless you bless me. The man asked, what is your name? And he answered, Yaakov. Then the man said, from now on you will no longer be called Yaakov, but Yisrael, because you have struggled with both God and men and have prevailed. Yaakov asked him, please tell me your name. But he answered, why are you asking about my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the place Peniel, the face of God, because, he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. As the sun rose upon him, he went on past Peniel, limping at the hip. This is why to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew that passes along the hip socket, because the man struck Yaakov's hip at its socket. Now, I want to move forward just slightly to Genesis chapter 33, because there's some key information here, and this section is fairly short, okay? So Jacob raised his eyes and looked out, and there was Esau coming and 400 men with him. So Jacob divided the children between Leah, Rachel, and the 2 slave girls, putting the slave girls and their children first, Leah and her children second, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he himself passed on ahead of them and prostrated himself to the ground 7 times before approaching his brother. Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. Esau looked up. On seeing the women and children, he asked, who are these with you? And Jacob answered, the children God has graciously given to your servant. Then the slave girls approached with their children, and they prostrated themselves. Leah too and her children approached and prostrated themselves. And last came Joseph and Rachel, and they prostrated themselves. Esau asked, what was the meaning of this procession of droves I encountered? And he answered, it was to win my Lord's favor. And Esau replied, I have plenty already, my brother. Keep your possessions for yourself. And Jacob said, no, please, if now I have won favor in your sight, then accept my offering. Just seeing your face has been like seeing the face of God now that you have received me. Please, take my blessing I have brought you, for God has dealt kindly with me, and I have enough. Thus he urged him until he accepted it. And Esau said, let's break camp and get going. I'll go first. Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are small, and the sheep and cattle suckling their young concern me, because to drive them even one day hard, the flocks will die. Instead, please, let my Lord go on ahead of his servant. I will travel more slowly at the pace of the cattle ahead of me, and the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. Esau replied, then let me leave some of my people with you. But Jacob said, there's no need for my Lord to be so kind to me. So Esau left that day to return to Seir, and Jacob went on to Sukkot, where he built himself a house and put up shelters for his cattle. That is why the place is called Sukkot, meaning shelters. Having traveled from Padan Aram, Yaakov arrived safely in the city of Shechem in Canaan and set up his camp near the city. From the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of silver the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent, and there he put up an altar which he called El Elohei Yisrael, God, the God of Israel. So there you go. Now that's a fascinating section. And I've got some really interesting stuff that I want to chat with you guys about today. And we kind of we got a little bit of discussion done last week regarding some of the introductory stuff on here, but I wanted to talk with you guys briefly about a larger pattern, kind of like a theme that I saw in this section here, and kind of get maybe what your take on it is. To me, when I look at this section, this seems like a perfect example of dealing with struggles and uncertainty in life. And I think let me play out for you, if you'll allow me, just a couple of minutes to kind of let you know what I'm thinking about, how this is laid out, and what my thoughts are on it, and you can share what your ideas are. So I want to note first that Jacob built his family first. If you take this like a theme of struggle in life in general, and you were to say, okay, Jacob spent 20 years, some people say 22 years, I don't know why there's a discrepancy, but he spent 20 years, 22 years building his family, getting wives, children, struggling in that way with the family life, okay? Then he went out into the world and he began to interact with other people. And his first interaction that he needed to deal with and overcome was the struggle with his brother, because there was enmity between them. And so, to me, this kind of speaks of a principle that maybe we need to consider, and that is, it's not time to go out into the world and struggle out there until you're secure in here. Does that make sense? Do you see? I know I'm reading something into the text here, but I think it's instructive that in order for us to be effective out in the world, we have to have a strong base and a strong foundation. And I think that, that building that relationship with your wife and your children, and having that strong foundation of peace in your home and peace with your wife, and that struggle has kind of, that means take your time, build what's important first as a strong foundation, then you can go out into the world and begin to see what God might have in store for you out there, what you need to deal with. So that was kind of the first thing that I took away from this section was, family is built up first, and then he goes out to struggle with other stuff out in the world that he has to deal with. Now, in relation to his struggle and dealing with his first struggle with his brother here and God, remember, we have what I kind of viewed as a 4-part, and this is so instructive of how it happens with us all the time. First, Jacob sends out a reconnaissance mission. He sends some messengers to go and meet with Esau. Now, I think we mentioned previously that in rabbinic tradition, they actually think that these messengers that Jacob sent out are the same messengers of God that he met with in verse 2, or verse 1. No, yeah, verse 2. They actually say in the rabbinic commentaries that these angels of God met Jacob and they were at his disposal, and that he sent these angels with this message to his brother Jacob. And that, it got a little fanciful to where the messengers are riding, they're flaming angels with riding flaming horses and carrying flaming swords, and they seriously intimidate Esau. It's kind of fanciful, but it's kind of funny too. But the first thing that he does is he sends out to get some information. I'd go tell my brother that I'm coming and let me know what his disposition is and how he's feeling towards me, and give me some hint of what I'm going to be dealing with. That to me is where it always starts. We gotta figure out what's going on around us. To me, that says when you come up against a struggle in your life, of any kind, whether it's a financial struggle, a relationship struggle, a health struggle, get all the facts first that you can. Get all the information that you can first, because dealing with half information or hearsay and you don't have the full details, that's trouble. That's where a lot of trouble can start right there for you, is if you're not dealing with all the information. So Jacob did the best he could. He sent out some messengers to get some information back to him, and he found out what did he find out that freaked him out, Darren? What did he find out that freaked him out? His brother's coming, and what's he got with him? He's got 400 dudes with him. It seems like a warlike party is coming. Now that's enough information to freak you out right there. Now and that I would say is where we get the bad news, the challenging news. This is going to be a confrontation. So what does he do next? What's next in the sequence is the flesh reaction. The flesh reaction is always fight or flight, right? That's his first instinct, is to get ready to fight or run, and that's basically what he does. This is almost always our own first reaction. Whenever we get the information that there's some trouble out there that we're going to have to deal with, then our own initial reaction is get ready to fight or run away from this problem, you know. So in verse 8, you can see what Jacob's initial reaction is. He became greatly afraid and distressed. He divided his people in flocks. And I think that kind of speaks to his preparation. I'm not sure if that's his preparation to fly, to run, because he does suggest, I'm going to split my people into two camps so that if one gets attacked, the other can escape. But then, you know, when you go to what happens in just a little bit, it doesn't seem that he ever actually followed through on that plan and because when he goes and actually confronts his brother, everybody's with him. All of the servants, unless he took some of his servants, like not the actual wives and servants who were his concubines, but it doesn't seem like he actually divided his servants and sent them, you know, half over here in order to flee and half over there to, you know, to try and make an escape. It doesn't seem like he ever did that. So his first reaction is to freak out, which is always our first reaction, is to freak out. And make some kind of preparations. Now, do you think that splitting his camp in two and preparing for one to escape is going to allay his fears? That probably doesn't do anything. I mean, if all he's thinking is, okay, maybe half of my family will escape, that's not really a terribly comforting thought. Maybe it's prudent. I think it's fairly prudent, but it's not going to be terribly effective in allaying our fears and our freaking out. We got it in our mind that maybe half of our people are going to die, maybe half will escape if we're lucky. So our first impression is always to have this flesh reaction to the challenge that we perceive. What would be best would be to just immediately go to prayer, but that's almost never happens. I know that's my ideal. Is that your ideal? I mean, when you see trouble hitting you or trouble coming your way, it'd be nice if our first reaction, instead of fight or flight or, you know, reacting in the flesh, that we react in the spirit and we go to God immediately in prayer. I think that should be our goal always, is to try to either A, move forward with getting closer and closer to whenever we're approached with fear or struggle or contention, that we go to prayer immediately, or at least lengthen the amount of time that it takes us to get to prayer. Jacob seems to have gotten to prayer rather quickly. So that's good. That's good. He did make some preparations, though. And then, as I said previously when we started, if we don't know how to pray, we'll fumble there as well. So hopefully this will be instructive for us in a moment when we get into that. And then I'm gonna suggest something to you that maybe you've heard before, maybe you haven't, but we'll kind of play out this idea, and you can see what you think of it. I think that Jacob repented and tried to make amends with his brother in a specific way. And I'll let you know what my thoughts are on that. It's kind of interesting. I had not heard anything like this before, and I thought it was kind of cool, and I'll share it with you. So, do you see how I've kind of organized this into a couple of different segments to where it's like, we're faced with struggles. We kind of got to get the details. We have to overcome our initial fleshly reaction of fear and trepidation. We get to prayer, and then we kind of figure out, is something wrong? Maybe I need to repent and make amends for something that I've done. That is a pattern that I think that I see in this section, and I'll explore it with you a little bit, and you can let me know what your thoughts are on this. So I'm going to move forward to the prayer of Jacob. Okay? So looking at verse 10 is when Jacob begins to pray. So as I mentioned, this is the second recorded prayer in the Bible. And what do you think about, in the words of this prayer, what do you think that this teaches us in general about prayer? Do you want me to read through this one more time? I'm going to read through this one more time. He says, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Yitzhak, Yehovah, who told me, return to your country and your kinsmen, and I will do you good. I'm not worthy of all the love and faithfulness you have shown your servant since I crossed the Jordan with only my staff. But now I have become two camps. Please rescue me from my brother Esau. I'm afraid of him, afraid he'll come and attack me without regard for mothers or children. You said, I will certainly do you good and make your descendants as numerous as the grains of sand by the sea, which are so many they can't be counted. So it's a fairly short prayer, but it's terribly instructive. What are the elements that you see in this prayer that you think might be instructive for us? What's the first thing that he mentions? He did. He absolutely called upon the name of the God of his fathers. So he identifies who he's speaking with. He uses he uses two different methods of identifying this God. He says the God of my father Abraham and the God of my father Isaac, and then he says Yod He Vav He. He identifies him by name.
And also in verse 10, I think he read faithfulness, and that word faithfulness is truth, and it's the same word that's in your Psalms 135. So it kind of pairs back to what you're saying.
Yep, absolutely. So if you were to, you guys remember like sentence diagramming, when you had to do that? If you had, I don't suggest that we're going to diagram this sentence, but if you had to take that first section of his prayer where he identifies who he's talking to, how might you classify that? If you were to like build a model prayer off of this one, for example, what might that section be called? How would you characterize that?
What was the question again?
How would you characterize that first little segment there that we just ran through? If you were to say this is this part of the prayer, what is that part? Okay. Yeah, it's like, who am I addressing my prayer to, right?
It's like the Lord our Father.
Yeah, it's exactly. You see some serious similarities to our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your holy name. There's so much similarity here. And I don't think that's incidental. I think that's purposeful. But it is clearly defining who he is talking to and on what basis he is talking to him. He uses the word Elohim twice, and the formal name of God, Yod He Vav He, once. What does that suggest to you? What do these two different epithets mean when you use Elohim versus Yehovah?
Which one of those is used for mercy?
Yehovah, as far as I know. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it is traditionally thought that when you say God, or Elohim in Hebrew, that is kind of calling out the characteristic of God being the judge of all the earth, because that's related with justice, because the word Elohim literally means the great mighty judge.
So is that the one of strict justice?
Yes,
And he used that twice?
he uses that twice. Then he says Yod He Vav He, which is this name that evokes the mercy of God. And so not only is he identifying who he's talking to, but he does seem to be, I'm wondering, what is he maybe trying to elicit by identifying God in these ways, by saying the God of my father Abraham and the God of my father Isaac and Yehovah. I wonder if there's something interesting about the way that he's addressing God. It's possible, and it would be pure speculation, but it's just an interesting thought. Tracy?
These same two words, mercy and truth, are used in Eliezer's prayer, Genesis 24:27.
Yeah.
Referring to Elohim. It says, Yahovah Elohim, blessed be Yahovah Elohim of my master Abraham, who has not left destitute my master of his mercy and truth.
Yep.
I being in the way, Yahovah led me to the house of my master.
So where it says love and faithfulness in this translation, in your translation, it's emet and chesed. Okay. So, and that's repeated in Eliezer's prayer?
Yeah.
Same words? Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? So let's, after you get past the first section of declaring God's sovereignty and identifying who you're talking to, then what would you say is the second part of this prayer? I would suggest, how about I just suggest to you what I think that's like next segment is, and then we can kind of characterize it. It seems fairly clear to me that he's like, you told me to return to my kinsmen and I'll do you good. And he makes another statement like this at the end of his prayer, where he says, you told me that my descendants would be as numerous as the grains of the sand by the sea, and they can't be counted. So that's two times that he makes similar statements, one at the beginning and one at the end. What are these statements exactly?
It looks like the first one he's saying, I'm doing what you said to do, and then the last, and at the end, he's basically calling on him to, you promised this, and I'm expecting that you will do this.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's important to note that before he does this, he's humbling himself.
Yes, absolutely.
He's not worthy of this instruction.
Right.
These mercies.
Right. Yes. So he's saying, God, I'm trying to be obedient. I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm not worthy of what you have given me. So he's declaring, I'm trying to do what's right. And then he's declaring, I'm not worthy of all the great things that you have done for me. Those are two powerful things. If you can address those things in your prayers, can we, when we are praying, say to God, I'm doing what you told me to do? Maybe a lot of times we can't. Maybe a lot of times we can't. Maybe we are conscientious about maybe some area of rebellion that we're not exactly doing what we should. Now, in this instance, he is literally doing exactly what God told him to do. Get up and leave here and go back to the land of Canaan. So he has that going for him, and that he is being obedient to that command specifically. And he's reminding God, I'm doing what you told me to do in this instance. And so is that relevant to the conversation here that he's having with God? It certainly seems that it is to me. If because is a direct relationship with him leaving the land of Padan Aram because God told him to, and he says, go back to your father's land of your fathers, and he's going and he's going to have this confrontation with his brother and he's afraid. He's saying, God, you told me to do this thing specifically, and because I am doing this, this is what has come about. So I have to let you know I'm doing exactly what you told me to do, and this is what has happened. So you must have had this in your plan. And by the way, I'm not worthy of all of the loving faithfulness and commitment, kindness and truth that you have shown me. So I think that is so instructive for us to be able to say to God, I'm trying to do what you're telling me to do, and to be humble. I'm not worthy of the great things that you've done for me.
But this is, you said something that I thought about this in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also, there's a lot of times we don't have that conversation.
Mm.
Like he's actually conversing with God like God is right there. And we don't do that.
That's true. That's
We
a
don't
good
do
point.
that. We don't talk to God as in a conversational way sometimes.
Right. How would you characterize? And you can paint with broad strokes and make broad generalizations. It's fine for the purpose of illustration. But how would you, in your own mind, characterize what often we do?
Well, just we ask for things for Him to do for us.
I think you're right. We don't. You know, that's a great point. That is a great point. Let me just portray it to you like this. If we were going to go to court, for example, and we needed to appear before a judge to make our case for a speeding ticket, for example, you would think that we would at least organize our thoughts a little bit and have some semblance of, this is what I mean, we may even make some notes to ourselves and say, I really ought to say this to the judge, hey, I did pay the fine, I really wasn't going too fast, I always try to go the speed limit, I'm not worthy of you to, throw out my speeding ticket, you know what I'm saying? We would kind of prepare at least a little bit. Is there a case to be made, do you think, to say, man, if we're willing to do that with a human judge in a court, should we be willing to take a little bit more care with the things that we're going to say to God? I would suggest maybe there is. Maybe there is a case to be made for being a little more careful in what we say. We've already noted last week in the power of speech and the power of the tongue and how you can, the tongue has great power in it. And so organizing our thoughts and kind of figuring out what do we want to say to this God and how do we want to portray this, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Sometimes I don't think we pray purposely.
Yes, purposeful prayer would be a really good way to put it. And there's a time when you're just in trouble and you're struggling and you just call out to God. Hey, that is what it is,
And it's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. But I think that's just as a general rule, maybe we do be a little more deliberate in our praying. And I think that a prayer like this one can be very instructive for us to kind of begin to put some ideas to how should I talk to God? I mean, we know that, and you might think to yourself, okay, well, this might seem manipulative. Like I'm going to organize my thoughts and my words that I want in order to, am I going to try and persuade God? Well, let me ask you this. Does it seem to you that Jacob is trying to persuade God? Is he using persuasive language? Is he being... You can't tell what the purpose of his heart is. What is the state of his heart? You don't know whether he's trying to be clever and crafty. Don't know whether he's speaking this from his heart. It seems heartfelt. I mean, he's in distress. I mean, right immediately after we see him, it says he was greatly afraid and distressed. First he divided his camps, but then he calls out to God. And it seems rather spontaneous to me.
He prayed specifically.
He did.
And that's what God wants you to pray specifically for what you need or what you
Right.
desire or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela?
What I was noticing is at the end of his prayer, it looks like he has actually, his prayer has aligned him with what God promised. Because
Yeah.
it ends with a promise, and the promise is the people,
Mm-hmm.
not the stuff.
Right.
And what does he do very next? Gives the stuff back to Esau, the stuff that...
Don't get ahead of me now. No, you're good. You're good. That's absolutely right. And I would point out one thing. For what purpose is he reminding God of his promises? Is that for God or for him?
I think it's for him.
I do too. Yeah.
He doesn't need to be reminded.
Right.
He wants to know if you know it.
Yes.
So it's this idea of you pray according to my word, and that's what we're supposed to be doing, is calling on his word. These are the promises and the hope that is in you.
Yeah.
It's his word.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to be calling on.
Did-
Maybe when he reiterated exactly what the promise was,
Yep.
he said here, word for word,
Yep.
down on him.
Yep. You know, that's a huge thing for a lot of people. I know it was for me. I know that, you know, it took me, you know, I've been in church my whole life. It wasn't until I was about, I don't know, 35 maybe, that I began to think to myself, so many times in the Bible they're asking God to fulfill his promises. And you know what? I don't know. What are the promises? I suddenly realized when I was in my mid-30s, I'm not even sure what God's promises are that are literally and specific for me. Because you can misappropriate some promises if you just go willy-nilly through the Bible and, you know, find somebody, God promised this person that. He's like, oh, I'm claiming that. Well, you can't really do that. You need to know, what did God promise you? Yes, Mike.
I think also that's why the Shema is such a powerful prayer to kind of meditate on and
Yeah.
align yourself with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I don't, you know, there's a lot of really powerful Jewish prayers that are, you know, the Shema, you might call it a Jewish prayer. It's not a Jewish prayer. Have you ever heard of a Siddur? You guys, does anybody have a Siddur? It's just a Jewish prayer book. It's like a Christian hymnal, you know. It is like 90% scripture. It's not like somebody made up a really cool prayer one day back in the Middle Ages and they decided to stick it in their prayer book, although there are a couple of those. You know, like Christians teach their children, you know, when they're young, now I lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep. Do you know where that comes from?
Nursery rhyme.
It's not actually a nursery rhyme. That comes from a Christian translation of a Hebrew prayer that is basically a version of the nighttime Shema. There's a specific nighttime Shema, which is, it starts with the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then it goes into your hands I commend my spirit. It's really, really similar to that little children's prayer that we have. And so, did somebody make that up? Yeah, they did. There are a few canned prayers in there that somebody made up that just became a traditional kind of thing, just like that little bedtime prayer for kids. But practically 90% of a Hebrew prayer book is all scripture. They actually pray scriptures. I think it's such a powerful thing that like Lou said, we got to be more deliberate in our prayers. And how much more deliberate can you be than praying the prayers that are in the Bible? Not like we're just going to use this prayer as our own, but prayers that are in the Bible as far as like Psalms, praying the Psalms, stuff like that. That's really powerful stuff.
And when you study it out and make all these connections, that his name is called the Word of God, that when you're praying and calling on the name of Yahovah, that is what you're doing.
Yep.
Calling on the Word of God.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's not just saying, help me.
It's yeah, help me.
It's not going to cut it, because the Messiah himself says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and they will not be able to come in.
Yeah,
They're calling on the name of the Lord, so it must not mean what you think it means. It's
right.
calling on his word.
Sure. Good point. Good point. Yes.
Well, I don't know if this has anything to do with it,
It may. Let's figure it out.
but in John 17 is where it's actually a minister told me this one time. I was talking about the Lord's Prayer, and he says that's not really the Lord's Prayer.
He's talking. Yeah, I know a
John
lot.
17 is.
Yeah, that's
John 17 is.
yeah.
And John 17 is.
That's a rather lengthy prayer.
Yes,
It's very specific.
it is. Very
I think that's a good distinction, and I've heard multiple sermons in the same vein, and I happen to agree with that. I think that's pretty cool. I do personally think that what a lot of people consider to be the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus said, you know, they said to him, teach us how to pray, and he said, Our Father who is in heaven. I think that was like the base model Let me show you how to start. Let me show you how to start. And I think it may have been instructive, just like we're doing right here, where we're like, and the gospel doesn't record this for us, but it seems to me like he would have said, you can use these words, and let me now go through these words with you and talk to you about what each of these words means and why it's important to address it in this way. But I think that that's like an initial step. This is like, but then when you go to John 17 and you see what Yeshua actually prayed to the Father, what's remarkable is the similarity in the structure of the Lord's Prayer and the Lord's Prayer. They're very, very similar. One is just more elaborate and deeper. You know what I'm saying? But they're strikingly similar.
I was going to say something else, but when you said that, that's how a lot of things are in the scripture. Just like the 10 words, the 10 commandments.
Yep. It's almost like an outline or something.
Is an outline of the Torah.
Yeah.
So it elaborates on that.
Right.
We need to open up our minds to understand that.
Yes.
It's not this little word here and this little word there.
Right.
What I was going to say is, when he says that, pray like this, our Father who's in heaven, I think, we just kind of, automaton droid kind of spit that out, but he's telling you to make his name holy, acknowledge that his name is holy. Just like Jacob's doing in this prayer.
Yep.
Our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name. You're holy. And I think for me, that was eye-opening because I don't think that we do that.
Right.
It's really, really calling the sovereignty and the holiness of our God and say, I fear you, I know, and then address.
Yep. And I think what's really cool about all Hebrew prayer starts with the same phrase. You probably all heard it. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, the ruler of the universe, who has done such and such. They're reclaiming not only who he is and giving great glory to his name, but then they're stringing together a list of adjectives about the great things that he's done before they actually get to the meat of what the prayer is about. Acknowledging.
We're so anxious just to, me.
Yes.
What's the first word in John 17?
What does it say?
It says, and he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father.
Yeah.
That's right. That's powerful, isn't it? That's so cool. Great insights, you guys. Note that the next section of Jacob's prayer is where he makes a call for help. He actually says, I am terrified, that I'm afraid. Rescue me. Save me. Is the word Yeshua in there? It wouldn't surprise me. It's a very real possibility that Yeshai or Yeshua or something is in verse 12. It says, deliver me, maybe your translation says. Okay, I just wondered if it was related to Yesha or Yeshua or some. So here he makes his request. He makes his request known to God. You know what's fascinating? What does that remind you of what I just said? Make your request known to God. What is that from? That's from Philippians, where Paul says, don't fear anything, but in all supplication with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God and the peace of God. Did you know that teaching from the Apostle Paul is bingo, straight right here? Did you notice what he says? Make your requests known to God is the last thing on his list. With supplication, with thanksgiving, he is laying out for you, Paul is in the book of Philippians, the exact same structure of noting who you're talking to, giving great glory to his name, giving praise to his attributes, reminding yourself about the great things that he's promised you and done for you, and then making your requests known to God with thanksgiving. So you see the order there is remarkably similar. So he makes his request known. Rescue me, please. What is that word please in the Hebrew? Is that a separate word, or does somebody stick that in there just for emphasis? What does your Hebrew say?
Is it after deliver me? Deliver me, I pray. Is that what you mean?
I think so, yeah. Right at the beginning of verse 12, what is the...
It's just saying now or pray now.
What does that sound like to you? You heard something like that before?
Save now. What is verse
Hoshi'ana. Yes, that's exactly what the people were...
Oh, that's the na.
Yep. Hoshi'ana. That is exactly what the people were crying out when Yeshua came into Jerusalem. Please, save now. That's exactly what they were saying. And that is pretty much what he's saying here. Please, save now. I'm afraid of my brother Esau. Now, you know what's remarkably interesting about this? What is he afraid of? He tells God specifically what he is afraid of, and you'll notice what he is saying that he is not saying that he's afraid of, or afraid for, I might say. What is he afraid for? His family, not himself. That reminds me of another one of the recorded prayers in the Bible, that of Moses, when he's making intercession for the children of Israel after this incident of the golden calf. He says he is concerned about the reputation of God. Please don't destroy these people because of their great sin, because then all the people around will think that you were not able to rescue them, or they'll think that you brought them out of Egypt into the desert here just to kill them. It will tarnish your own reputation, which is very interesting.
And that's kind of how the Messiah was praying in John 17 as well. He was praying for his family. I do not pray that you take them out of this world, but that you deliver them from the evil.
Right.
And he's praying about glorifying your name, and it is glorified. I have glorified it. So
Yep.
he's praying the same
Yep.
thing.
That is, being unselfish, truly unselfish, and being more concerned about others than yourself is a powerful, powerful principle. And I think it is demonstrated again here, where Jacob is saying, I am afraid that he'll come and attack me without regard for the mothers and their children. Of course I think he's afraid for himself. But he doesn't say that necessarily straightforward. He says, I'm afraid that he's going to attack the mothers and their children.
Well, ultimately, if he lost them, it would be devastating to him.
That's right.
Just like it was when Joseph was.
Absolutely. And it's directly related to the promise of God saying, you told me that I would have descendants as great as this and that. If my brother comes and attacks me and kills these women and children, what are we going to start over? Or, this is so similar to the prayer of Moses. God told him, hey, stand back and I'll wipe out these people and I'll just start over with you. It's kind of a rough, really similar situation here. He's telling God, these are the people. They're not big yet. There's only, I don't know how many there are here. I mean, he's got 11 children and 4 wives. I don't know if you'd include the descendants, but this is when it's a small group saying, don't let them be wiped out. It's fascinating to me. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe that's when he puts them back together.
Excuse me?
I don't see it saying anything about there being 2 camps after his prayer.
That is what puzzled me.
You said that promise, that you said that we become what does the promise say? As a caution to descendants as the sand of the sea. Maybe you put them back together and really said, okay, God, you're going to have to do it. I'm not going to let you. Because you could take out half my family, but
Yeah.
this camp, and then these could prosper.
Yes.
Put them all back together. I'm going to hold you to your word.
That's absolutely correct. I wondered about that myself because it says here in the beginning of this section, I've become 2 camps. And then it also says that he was thinking, I'll split up my camp, and if these people escape, and then those will, be attacked, and then these will be able to escape. And what's interesting is it doesn't seem that he actually ever did that. He made a plan to do it, and he spoke, I've become 2 camps. The text doesn't support that, though. So it makes me think that after he got done freaking out, and he got done with his prayer session, that his mind became a little more clear, he became a little less freaked out, and he said, I'm going to actually put my camp back together, and I'm going to let the chips fall where they may because I trust God.
Yeah. You have to trust God when he's seen his brother coming after what he did.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think that's so instructive. I think it actually, prayer has been so it does have a calming effect upon the spirit. I can't tell you how many times that I have been in distress in one way or another and just begun to pray, and it is so calming to a degree, you know. It really does kind of bring a sense of peace somehow a lot of times. Tracy?
There's something, and I can't quite put it together, but I think there's some kind of relation to Israel becoming two camps. Literally. They will become two houses.
Yes, I'm going to talk about that in a second because I think that is definitely important. So you're suggesting that maybe it's prophetic?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it is, because there's also a lot of talk about passing over and crossing
Yeah,
over.
yeah, absolutely. So we'll talk about that in a sec. I think you could be right. You could be right. One of the things that I wanted to just bring to your attention here is that Jacob here does demonstrate a wonderful combination of faith and works.
Work together.
Faith and works working together. What do you think I mean? Do you see what I'm talking about in relation to the situation of his faith and works working together? How do you see that in here?
His faith was to trust God, and then he formed everybody together to go forward instead of running the other way. So
Right.
He had to trust God, and then go through it, whatever.
Right. Yes, you're absolutely right, I think that he prayed, and he, in his mind, in his heart, in his soul, in his spirit, however you want to word it, he had submitted himself to God, and he knew that God's going to have to take care of this thing. But he didn't stop there. He prepared himself for battle, as according to a lot of traditional ideas, both Christian and Jewish, suggests that him dividing his camp was a battle preparation. You know, if this part gets attacked, then this one won't, get killed. And then he also prepared a gift of appeasement to make up to his brother somehow by sending forth some appeasement. So I think that this is a really nice example of combining, making temporal provision with spiritual provision, praying and having to relinquish a lot in our minds, but there is something that I can do. I can try to protect my family by dividing them. I mean, it says he's got a bunch of servants, so I'm assuming some of them were armed. And if you're traveling through the Middle East with a huge caravan like this, you've got some defense. You've got, a lot of those servants are probably armed. I'm fairly confident that he would have prepared each group, if he did split it into two, for some kind of, get ready, man. These guys, like my brother's coming with 400 guys, he's got to prepare to defend his family.
And for him to give his brother all those gifts, then hopefully he was thinking his brother would see the gifts and to see the more like
Right.
repentance and accept that, and then
Right.
that would get his go between, and then they'd be fine.
Right, absolutely.
That's wisdom.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. So I think this is a good reminder of us that, in our lives, and they are meant to be a nice blended balance of faith and works, that we have to trust in God for as much as we can, and then we have to make some preparations ourselves. Definitely we have to do that. Yeah, absolutely. Now I want to before we get to the two camps and the Ephraim and stuff like that, I want to ask you a question. A lot of people, most that I have heard, have talked about this as an act of appeasement, of taking all of these things, there's actually 550 animals that are presented here and given to his brother. It is almost universally understood and accepted that this is an appeasement. That this is, and when I think of appeasement, I'm thinking Churchill and, Hitler and Neville Chamberlain. It's like Hitler's being aggressive and he's killing people, and it's like, well, let's just give him what he wants, and maybe he'll chill out a little bit and we'll decide not to kill so many people. And most people think that what they're trying to do here is Jacob's trying to buy off his brother's anger by giving him a bunch of free stuff. That's the most common interpretation of this passage. But I have another idea that is not mine, but it is not terribly common. It was actually from Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who's the head rabbi in England, came up with this really interesting idea, which really struck a chord with me, and it made a lot of sense. He has suggested not that Jacob was trying to appease his brother, but that what he was literally doing is repenting by returning the stolen blessing. He is actually returning the stolen blessing that he took when he dressed up like his brother. And he didn't bring out, he just painted with a really broad brush in this article that I read from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks about that. And when I read it, I thought, that is pretty interesting. And I began to dig a little bit deeper. And I looked more carefully at the blessing that he actually got from his father when he pretended to be his brother. And then I compared that with the blessing that he got from his father when his father knew exactly who he was. And I was fascinated to see some rather interesting things, and I want to take a look at that with you. So let's operate on the premise for just a moment that he is not appeasing his brother, but he's actually trying to make amends and repent by giving back to his brother the blessings that he stole from him. Look at it with me, Genesis 27, verse 28. Genesis 27, 28. So just back just a little bit. So when he tricks his dad into thinking that he is Esau, this is the blessing that Isaac gives him when he thinks he's giving a blessing to Esau, but it's actually Jacob. Verse 28 says, "May God give you the dew of the sky and the richness of the earth and plenty of grain and new wine. May peoples bow to you and nations serve you. You will be Lord over your brothers, and the sons of your mother will bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and may those who bless you be blessed." Now, think with me for just a moment. If Isaac, is thinking that this blessing is actually going to Esau, and then it's going to the wrong person, do you see the elements of this blessing as actually being more appropriate for Esau? Maybe it'll help if you take a look at Genesis 28, verse 3. Just move forward just a little bit to Genesis 28, verse 3. This is the blessing that his father gives him when he does know who he's dealing with. Look at the difference here. It says, "May the sovereign God bless you. May he make you fruitful and give you a multitude of descendants. Then you will become a large nation. May he give you and your descendants the blessing he gave to Abraham, so that you may possess the land God gave to Abraham, the land where you've been living as a temporary resident." Those two blessings are very different. What would you say is the key difference between them?
Blessing of the land, Abraham's blessing.
Yes, this blessing in chapter 28, verse 3 is identical, pretty much, to the blessing that was given by God to Abraham and to Isaac. This blessing in chapter 27, verse 28, has one similarity. What is that similarity? The one similarity to the blessing of Abraham and Isaac was given by God is bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. That's the only similarity. The other parts of it are entirely temporal. They're not spiritual blessings. They're temporal blessings. He's saying, may you be blessed with stuff and power. May you have wealth and power. Those aren't spiritual blessings. Those are temporal blessings. And that made me think that Isaac, when he was trying to bless his firstborn son, was not going to give him the spiritual blessing that was intended for the spiritual son. He was giving him a very temporal blessing that was intended for the temporal son. When I say temporal, I mean worldly. I mean fleshly. He's giving Esau fleshly blessings because Esau is a fleshly man. You know, I have thought often that God is gracious and He gives to spiritual people spiritual blessings. And He gives to fleshly people, worldly blessings. If you don't believe in God and you have no concept of God and you are not going to go to heaven or be in His kingdom or however you want to look at that, then does it make sense that God would bless you on this earth because that's all you're getting? It does to me, and it always has. I know that we, the Protestant work ethic, or however you want to look at it, says this world is not your world. You see all the people with the bumper stickers that say not of this world. Well, we're not looking for our blessings in this life. We're looking for them in the next life. And I think that this blessing of Isaac accidentally going to Jacob was intended for Esau and for good reason. It's a material blessing because Esau is a man of the field. He's a physical man who has no interest in spiritual things.
Did Isaac intend both blessings to go to Esau?
I don't think so.
Because the first thing was the whole stew stuff, right?
The stew?
Yeah, he's giving you this birthright or whatever. I think last time we talked about that was kind of like this first one was the one he didn't want.
Right.
This was more of a spiritual nature type of blessing.
Right.
And then the second one where he dresses up like he was more physical.
Right.
So was Isaac's intent to give both of those to Esau?
That's a good question. We don't know what Isaac's intent would have been in regards to the Bechor, the firstborn blessing, or is that the Besorah? I think that might be the Besorah. That's a good question. We don't know exactly what Isaac's intent was, but I have to think that maybe after reviewing this and looking at it a little more carefully, I have to consider that maybe Isaac did know what he was doing, that he intended for the blessings to go where he knew that they would be the most appropriate. It made me think when I look at this with Jacob taking all of this stuff, and you know what's so interesting is if you look in Genesis 33, verse 11, you notice that he says, "Take, please, my blessing that I have brought you." And in the previous verse, I think it's verse 10 or 9, he says, in verse 10, accept my offering. That's the word mincha. This is one of those things that goes on the sacrament, that like in burning incense and a bread offering, a drink offering. He's making an offering, and he's saying literally that word is take my blessing. Your translation may not say blessing, but it is. And you know what's fascinating? When you look at that in Genesis 33, verse 11 in the Hebrew, 33:11 in the Hebrew, says, my translation here says, take my gift, take my present. But in the Hebrew it says, birkati. It's the same firstborn blessing. It's the same root of the firstborn blessing that he stole from his brother. I think he is actually trying in his own way to give up a tremendous amount of wealth. It's obviously a tremendous amount of wealth. I mean, it's 550 animals. That's a lot of money. He gave his brother a pretty good sized fortune. Some have even suggested, we don't know, the Bible doesn't give us any numbers for how many sheep or goats or whatever he had, but a lot of people have suggested that he gave the majority, gave a bulk of his wealth to his brother. And I think it seems fairly reasonable to suggest that he has discovered the source of his true blessing, which is God. He doesn't need to concern himself with material blessing. And I think he's literally trying to make good with his brother by saying, I have wronged you, take the blessing. And he's trying to give that blessing back to his brother.
But wasn't Jacob, I get him mixed up sometimes, didn't he work for his father-in-law for so many years?
Laban, yes.
And then so the father-in-law took the best of the stuff, and then God had it to be the mix, so he gave them the best blessing of the flocks.
Right.
The best, they turned out to be the best, and the father-in-law thought he was getting the best, and
Yep.
he did all. He was going to take give him
The speckled and spotted and yeah.
And so all of his animals and things he had was the best of the best.
Yeah, I absolutely think they were. And it makes you wonder, this is the sovereignty and the power of God. I'm going to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. I'm going to take away the wealth of Laban because he's a greedy glut and he's not worthy of having these blessings. I'm going to bless Jacob because what does Jesus say? He says, seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added unto you. I think that this wealth that Jacob got will be added unto you. I know you need food. I know you need wealth in order to live. I'll provide that for you.
Because the father-in-law thought he was giving them the junk.
Right.
And it turned out that God took the junk and blessed it and made it the best.
That's right. So not only does God punish Laban for his greed, he blesses Jacob so he can provide for his family, and he gives him perhaps a besorah, an offering for his brother, in order to make good with his brother.
A big turning point for Jacob was the stone.
Yeah,
Jacob's ladder
right.
section, because that's when he said, this is the house of God. What does that mean? This is the kingdom of God.
Yeah,
Seek first this kingdom of God,
Yep.
and then all things will be added to you.
absolutely. And we talked about that last week too, when we were saying about that possible chiasm that's going on there. Is like when he leaves the land, he sets up a stone, encounters some angels, and engages in a covenant. When he leaves the land of Padan Aram to return to the land of Canaan, he does the exact same thing. He sets up some stones, engages in a covenant, and comes across a group of angels. There's probably a chiasm in there somewhere. I don't know if Angie has found it yet, but maybe she will.
I found the hints of another one. Are you going to talk about? Yeah.
Yeah, I got
You
it.
know,
I
you
got
said
this one too.
the first prayer in the Bible is Eliezer's prayer.
Yep.
And then this one is the second prayer, right? Right after this prayer, he gets his thigh dislocated.
His hip, yeah.
Yeah. No, that word in Hebrew for hip is the same word used right before Eliezer's prayer when Abraham had him put his hand on his thigh.
That's what Darren was mentioning last.
Thigh happening before the first prayer and thigh happening after the second. So I don't know why
That's
I'm bouncing back and forth.
Well, and that word thigh is also the same word for the centerpiece of the menorah.
very interesting.
It's all related.
Yeah, it's
The
very.
centerpiece we know is points to the Messiah.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. Well, okay, so I have 2 topics of discussion remaining in my notes, at least. I'm going to throw this out there really quickly. You notice 2 camps in the beginning here is called Machanaim. Fascinating thing. Go and look up where that word Machanaim appears in your Bible and notice what is happening each time that place is mentioned. You'll see some fascinating, weird, and powerful stuff that is also related to one of the questions that I have here, but I don't have enough time to really dig deeply into that. Tracy?
So what do you think that means when he says this is the camp of God? He called the place Machanaim, and then later said, I have become Machanaim.
I have no idea, man. That really does trip me out. I think it must be prophetic, like you mentioned previously. And this word Machanaim it is related to King David and Mephibosheth and Ziba, a Gentile servant of the house of Saul. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. And that is totally prophetic. Very, very interesting. Take a look at that if you get an opportunity. Where that Machanaim appears and what is happening. As a side note to that, look at every instance that David and Mephibosheth and Ziba have together, and you'll see an amazing picture, prophetic picture of the houses of Israel. Fascinating stuff.